Welcome, this is a recording of a webinar at Leeds University.
I have 11 o'clock, so welcome to everyone. I'm Joe Levesque. I'm from Texas. I'm here in my home in Mansfield, just south of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Welcome, everyone. You know, whenever I come to a class, I have to say I'm always surprised to see people here. I don't know what that says about me, but it's good to have you here, and I'll try not to waste your time. I'll give you the agenda. As you can see, the first slide. Yeah, let's do that. I'll set this up, but the first thing that I'm going to talk about, some opening thoughts. Before I go any farther with the background information, now let me cover this first slide so you know what you're in for in case you need to make adjustments. What we're here for is for the next 2 hours with a break, 10-15 minute break. That I'll keep an eye on the clock here and try and time myself. I got to start with telling you I'm a bit of a storyteller, so I did time these slides and I rehearsed them. But one of the things about being in the job that I'm in is that I've learned about myself and other professors. We like to talk, so and I always think I'm such a great, interesting storyteller. You can judge that after 2 hours of listening to me, but I do like to put in, I do like to talk and ramble, and that's why the slides are important and the timing is important. I'm going to give you some opening thoughts as I just did. One key opening thought here is that the first thing that I'm going to talk about is not on the slides, but I'll start that right after I finish this introductory slide. I went back and reviewed all the things that I had pulled together as I was preparing for this. You know, I think you're going to find some useful information. I hope that you do. But one of the things that I looked at, and as I was reviewing, I said I left this out, and I can't believe that I did. It's very important. There wasn't time to include it, but I'm just going to take maybe 3 or 4 minutes and talk a bit about ethics and the importance of that topic here. The outline for the next 2 hours you've got, I'll talk for 50 minutes. I'm hoping that you have some questions along the way. If not, I'll just keep talking, but don't hesitate to type it up and type your question in along the way rather than save it until later. And if I think I'm going to cover it in a future slide, that's okay. We can do it as you would like. Take a break, then the second hour, 15 minutes of final discussion, more questions. Along the way, I'm going to introduce all the elements of the dissertation. As I see them, they're pretty common. They're straightforward, and it's interesting that they can all be found online. I did a lot of my research online in preparation for this, just to bring myself current, see if there's anything that I'm missing from when I did my dissertation back in 2000. So it's been 17 years ago. And I stay pretty current because I'm still in the business and I'm still in front of the classes and staying pretty busy even at this age. So I'll introduce the elements of the dissertation. But again, I'd like to emphasize you'll be able to find all of those just by typing in dissertation topics, everything that I have, or things that are available on the internet. So I'm going to try and focus, as I introduce the elements, I'm going to try and focus on things that were my personal experience. Those are the things that I would tell you if we were in a live classroom. I would tell you about my frustrations. I would tell you about my successes. Certainly would tell you about my failures. And those are some of the essential details and strategies as we go along. Next slide, please, Joe. Major components. There's 5 chapters to the dissertation. Most of you already know that. Chapter 1, introduction. But I'm going to stop there and say, as far as the introduction, I want to cover 3 major things about ethics. I looked at 3 or 4 pages and went back and reviewed things that I was exposed to. First thing, and I think it'd be 3 or 4 things here. This discussion is now on ethics. It's not in your slides, so if you want to take notes on, I'll give you 3. I wanted to bring up the Stanford Prison Experiment. Most of you have probably been exposed to that in your classes. If you haven't, Google that up. It's easy to find, and take a look at what happened there at Stanford University. I want to say it was the mid-70s, early 80s. It was during the Vietnam War, and I'm a Vietnam veteran, so I can remember the days pretty clearly. And I can remember when I was going back to school, this was one of the topics that they were bringing up, because it was an experiment that brought out a lot of controversy. And the guy, Philip Zimbardo, I think is his name, I didn't write it down, he conducted it, and they had to pull the plug on it in 2 or 3 days, largely because of the ethics, the human informed consent issue. And that's the second thing. The first thing is the Stanford Prison Experiment is the first one that really brought this to the attention of people who were directing dissertation students and learners. There's a lot, and I have my own opinions that I won't share with you here, but I often wonder, well, I will share them with you here. I often wonder if that wasn't a big publicity stunt on the part of that professor to make him famous during a time when things like that, protests and controversies on campuses, were a big deal. He knew he would get the press. He couldn't have been an intelligent psychologist and not known what was going to happen. That's as far as I'll go with that. But what that ushered in, and how it's relevant to you and me in terms of ethics, is the idea of informed consent. If you are going to do your research and dissertation on human subjects, there's areas that you'll want to pay attention to. Now, I'm not sure what the requirements are at LIGS, but you can check. And even if they don't have these sites, I suggest that you take a look at them. And the one is called the IRB. IRB stands for Institutional Review Board. I think they're still based in Miami. And the third link, if you're looking for a link, they have programs that, one that I've been exposed to numerous times called citiprogram.org, CITI program, one word, .org, and it stands for the Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative. I said all that to say this. When you embark on research, you must have certain things in order, especially if you're talking with human beings. For example, before embarking on the research, you want to make sure that you're not dealing with sensitive issues like violence, child abuse. Now, I'm sounding a little bit dramatic, and I don't mean to, because I'm not sure that all of this is necessary for those of us in the business world. And by that I mean those of us who are doing research like I did on my dissertation. Yes, it was with human subjects, but I wasn't sticking needles into anyone. And I wasn't doing anything that is listed on the list of ethical guidelines for research, but I still had to prove that to the committee before I could get it approved, because of things that had happened in the past, like the Stanford Prison Experiment and others. And if you're doing a focus group, you must treat others fairly, ask them leading questions. And I'm not going to read this to you, I'm just giving you a flavor of some of the ethical issues that you want to take a look at, because you don't want to violate them, even if you don't have to. For example, and I underline this one, I didn't know this, but young people under the age of 16 in Scotland, 18 in other parts of the United Kingdom, cannot take part in interviews or focus groups without written parental consent. And you will also require disclosure in order to be able to work with such groups. So if you're planning to do those kinds of research projects, you would agree with me that ethics is a big deal. And there's a preview on some of the sites that you could look at to keep yourself out of trouble. Not with the university. I mean, you'll comply with what the university asks you to do. But if your dissertation is a good one, and I know that it will be, and you do get it published, which I'm sure that you can. Sometimes that's just a matter of getting out there and talking, presenting it to many different groups. If you do a good dissertation and you get it published, then you will be asked to come and present it somewhere. And the few times that I've done that, people in the audience, depending on their own agenda and what they're sent to the conference to do, people in the audience will often ask you those kinds of questions, just to ask the questions, I guess. So we're going to go through chapter 1, which is the introduction and the problem statement, and let me get to the notes that I made in addition to the notes that I have here. In chapter 1, and let me kind of preview chapters 1, 2, and 3, and I'll say this probably 2 or 3 times during the presentation. You'll save yourself, excuse me, a lot of time, save yourself a lot of heartburn, and you'll save yourself a lot of frustration if you have, as one of you told me recently, if you have the end in sight already. Do you know what you want to get? What is the research question that you really want to answer? And do all of the other parts fit that? Those are the things we're going to be reviewing today. But typically, that's what I see people get stumped on, especially with the problem statement. It's amazing to me how the number of mentees and people that I work with who don't really know what they're after. They just know the area that they want to talk about. And you probably do too. You probably have an idea of something that you want to research. You want to know if that's okay. And I'm hopefully going to help you do that. The problem statement is the most difficult because you have to live with it through the entire dissertation, through the entire research project. It is the most difficult, and you really want to answer the question up front, who cares? Who's going to read this that cares about it? Does it matter in the field that you're working with? Does it fill the gap, as we say? Is it significant? And the significance is usually something that people stumble over. I'm going to give you some tips, I hope, that are helpful. They were to me when I was going through. Because ultimately, on this fifth one, you'll have to pass excuse me, the test for scientific merit. That's goofy. And I'll tell you why. I think it is. If you Google it up, as I've mentioned in this slide, you'll see a tremendous number of subjective ideas on what scientific merit means. So I'm not going to dwell on that, just to say, if you start previewing that, you'll be able to say, well, it looks like these 3 or 4 people agree on what scientific merit is, and mine certainly does, so I can go with that. And you check for the presence of personal bias. Why? I always ask people with this, why are you doing what you're doing? I don't really care what you're doing. I mean, I don't care is the wrong way to put that. I have no vested interest except in helping you out in getting to where you want to be. But I probably don't have a real interest in the topic that you're going after, but you do. And therefore you're biased right from the start. It's something that's near and dear to your heart. It's something you want to know about. It's something you want to research, and maybe something you want to teach in the future, which was the case with me. And that's important to cover that up front. Make sure that, I mean, you can do something that you're passionate about. And I encourage that, but I also think that you'll want to take a look at the bias. And questions, hypotheses, assumptions, limitations will, please, excuse me, I brought some cough mints here so I wouldn't do that to you. So let's move to the next slide. I think I'm on track. I can skip ahead quickly on some of the slides. Some of them I could spend hours on just one slide, so I'll keep an eye on that. Chapter 2, you address the theory, and I like to bring up the concept of what they call, in a few schools that I've worked for, and I've worked for several. I've got a slide that covers that later. But a lot of the schools like to use the term scholar practitioner. I like that. I mean, that fit me perfect. Am I a scholar? I don't know. It depends on who you talk to. Do I have the credentials that say that I have the ability to think critically and scholarly? Yes, I do have a Doctor of Business Administration from the University of Sarasota. It's a great school before they became Argosy. I guess they're still a great school, but that really was irritating to me, the name change. But I'm going to talk a little bit more on the other slides. Am I a scholar? Okay. I'm scholarly in a few areas, and I'm definitely a critical thinker. In fact, I had one of my colleagues many years ago, 25 years ago. He saw me in a coffee room with a bunch of people, and he said, "You know, Joe Levesque, you're about as arrogant a person as I've seen." And this is a friend of mine. And I said, "No, I know who I am. I'm not arrogant. I'm something, but I'm not arrogant." And he said, "Well, then you're iconoclastic." And I said, "Okay." I had to go look it up. I didn't know what the word meant, but it fit me pretty good. I'm a critical thinker. I love the literature review, and I want you to fall in love with it during this presentation. I want you to focus on something that you may not have done before. This was the biggest help to me in graduate school. Are there seminal works? Are there people, the big names, for lack of a better word? Who is recognized? Who's getting published in the big, what I heard one person, a friend of mine, call it top-tiered journals. I never thought of it that way, but I guess there are top-tiered, the ones that it's very hard, that nobody can get into unless you work for Harvard, and that is very true. And then there's other tiers of places, so there's lots of room. But who are the big names around that are in your area? Find them and do your research, your literature review on them first. They're the ones that you want to include. What are they saying? What's been updated? The percentage rule of scholarly literature versus books, or there's the scholar practitioner again. Am I a scholar? Yeah, but I'm more of a practitioner. I'm a business person. I like to make money. I like entrepreneurial stuff. I'm a risk taker for sure. So the term scholar practitioner fits me very well, even though I wear one hat better than the other, I think. Are you going to do historical? We're going to get into the data and what you're going to use. Are you going to use historical? The field of dissertation writing, in my opinion, has opened up incredibly in the past 20 years since I did mine. It's all up for grabs now. It doesn't belong to the old school anymore. And by old school, you probably know what I mean, but I didn't put this book in here, but if you wanted to see where a lot of my thinking comes from in terms of my approach to academics, there's a book called Imposters in the Temple. Imposters in the Temple by Dr. I can't think, it was Martin Anderson. Imposters in the Temple by Martin Anderson. Now, folks, there's a scholar, and it was a scholarly work, but it was written from a practical practitioner standpoint, and I've never been the same since I read his book. And research design, we're going to talk a little bit about. I'm trying to roll my mouse down. I need to use the arrow here. Chapter 3. What have I got in Chapter 3? A big name for you, Creswell. I forget his first name, and I don't even know where he's at now, but you won't have any problem going on the internet and doing some research on Creswell. And Creswell or someone like that is who you will want to quote and cite when you finally decide on your topic and your research design, and find the literature from Creswell that tells you exactly how to defend that. In other words, do you have the proper method to answer the question that you have? And he's the best source, and that is, I don't think it's that hard to do, but people stumble on it because a lot of them, as we're going to talk about, relationship between research questions, hypothesis, design, and methods. Sure, those are the elements. Slides that I've got coming discuss quantitative, qualitative, the two major ones. Quantitative being in the old school. People in the old school from years ago are looking for you to be an expert on statistics. That scared me at first until I saw that that wasn't really necessary. I'm pretty good at statistics, but I'm not a statistician. But I know how to interpret these things, and I know what I'm looking at when I read articles, and that's usually what the schools want you to do. Qualitative is deceptive. I've read some that I like, and I have some examples for you, but it is deceptive. People say, well, I don't want to do quantitative because I'm scared of the numbers. It's okay. You're among friends, okay? But it's not that tough, and it's easier, I think, to do quantitative than qualitative for reasons that I'll talk about in another slide. And the mixed methods. I think you're getting into dangerous territory, but I've watched mixed methods become very popular in the past 10 years, and now it's being trashed in a lot of the schools that I'm exposed to. The population, who you're going to talk to, if you're going to do surveys and do a population thing, and guaranteed participation is, I cover again another slide, components. Are you sure you can get enough people to have a sample that you could use? We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about descriptions of the methods, population. And the most important thing on this slide is getting your method of data collection approved by your tutor, mentor, the school, before you go get any of the data. That has been a big problem. I'm not sure why. It seems to me to be a little bit strict, but it is the rule everywhere that I've been. In fact, one example, I had a mentee 15 years ago who did excellent work, and he was going to gather his data from the company trip where they were going on a cruise somewhere for a week or two, where he had everybody captive, and he did just that, but he had not gotten the data collection method approved before he started to gather it, and they made him start all over. You don't want to find yourself in that position, do you? Chapter 4 and 5. In my opinion, and this is just an opinion based on what I did and what I've seen others do, folks, if you get chapters 1, 2, and 3 down, you know your research question, you know what you want to ask, you're sure of the method, you're sure that the method fits, you know that you've got the sample, I mean, you're ready to lock and load and move in. Chapters 4 and 5 should be the easiest part. It amazes me if I learn, which I do sometimes, that people stumble on chapter 4 and 5. You've done the research, and now you're just reporting the findings, especially in chapter 5, and you're telling the reader what you did wrong, what you did right, the limitations, the conclusions, what can we draw, what's conclusive, if anything, where did I go wrong. Of course, it'll test the quality of your writing, and that was a big stumbling block for me, because when I came into the program, and please remember, when I entered my doctoral program, it was later in life, I guess I was 48. I'd already been in the business for several years. I had been teaching for 10, 15 years, so I knew a lot about what goes on behind the scenes, like the imposters in the temple book that I had mentioned. It is a criticism of higher education, but it's a good read. It's an honest, look behind the corporate veil, something we don't often get to do. But I got beyond my point. The quality of writing, I'm a good writer. I've always been a good business writer. I've written business plans and marketing plans, and I've always been, I'm a great proofreader. I studied under some of the best people in the area of tourism when we produced brochures and things like that. But when I wrote my first two papers, and I'm getting ahead, but there's another slide coming. When I wrote my first two papers at the University of Sarasota, the doctor sent him back with an F on both of them. And he said, "Joe, you didn't even read the directions. You didn't use one peer-reviewed article." And I thought to myself, I was trying to take a shortcut, and I don't think they're going to let me get away with this. And then I went to meet with him. Of course, I did most of the work here in Texas, but I had to go down to the classes, what they were called intersessions, where you went down and met with an instructor all day for 5 days. It's a good way to do it. I enjoyed it. But they said, "We understand what you're doing. Your papers are good, but they're business papers. You're writing like a marketer. You're trying to sell us something. We don't want to be sold something. We gave you a rubric that says, evaluate this." Okay, I read the rubric, and I said, well, I guess I have to answer the questions on the rubric and apply them to the paper, or I'm going to get an F and everything. And I realized at that point that coming from the MBA and thinking that I knew it all going into the doctoral program, I realized, well, no, I don't know it all, because we're working with with peer-reviewed journals, and I don't know anything about those. And my first exposure to them was, I don't like this at all. So I had to make the transition from business writing to academic writing. I did that. I did hire. So the school allowed me, and you'll have to ask here. What are you allowed? What resources along the way are allowed by the school? I was allowed to have an editor after I wrote it to proofread it. Now, if I got caught with somebody else writing it for me, that's a different story. I'm not going to do that, and you're not either, I'm sure. I didn't know anything about APA. Very frustrating, very constrictive, but that's the way it is in academic writing. Dr. Martin Anderson has 2 chapters on this. I've never forgotten them. Human participants, I talked about the requirements. Can I obtain the sample size needed? Can you? I don't think you ever know until you go into it, but I was not able to. Can you obtain it? You need to be able to answer that question, especially if you get into that gathering of the data in the sample and you can't get it. What's your plan B going to be? I'm going to talk about that in a few other slides. Personal experiences, choosing a topic. Choosing a topic, as I mentioned before, you just need to get on the internet and start looking at something. I've got probably 24 examples in the slides to come to talk about and give you some ideas. Choosing a topic for me, if you'll drop down to the bottom of the slide here, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but my dissertation turned out to be, I started out, I wanted to do something in tourism. And I got looking at the literature review, and there just wasn't enough out there at that time that I could find about theme parks like Six Flags and SeaWorld, the places I've worked for. There wasn't enough literature directly related to the literature was there, but there was not enough of the peer-reviewed journal literature to support my literature review. And I saw that very quickly once I began to get into focus on what they were asking me to do. Sure, there were a lot of practitioner articles, but one of the slides that I didn't cover earlier, where it had in the literature review, I asked the question of my folks, and I've asked it several times, many times at conferences. I would say, I know what I need to have in the literature review in terms of peer-reviewed articles that support and show where I'm filling a gap in that literature, but can I use books, I would ask. You get different answers. I said, can I use just articles? How do I approach just an internet link? That sort of thing. And I've always been told that there's an 80-20 rule, 80% peer-reviewed, 20% whatever you want to do. But I brought that up at conferences just to test the waters on the people who are speaking in the panel. I'm the only one that's ever heard of the 80-20 rule, apparently, because some of these folks are very hard-nosed. I wanted to do tourism. Then I wanted to do puppet shows because my brother and I at the time owned a pretty successful puppet show that we took to fairs and festivals and state fairs all around the country. There's no literature out there, ladies and gentlemen, that supports armadillo puppet shows. So that was out, and my committee said, that's too bad. We really would like to read a dissertation on that topic, but it couldn't be supported. I did this one approach, quantitative, I did this. So I wound up backing into my topic as I was going through the classes, and they would ask us to find the articles, use the rubric, bring them to class, and evaluate them using the rubric and our own opinion and experiences. And I found very quickly that in business publications, there were tons of articles about downsizing in all sorts of different industries and the good and the bad, and we all know about that. We may have experienced it. So downsizing, I thought, was, well, that's going to be accepted by the committee, so that needs to be a key element. But what am I going to write about downsizing? Well, I also read in the literature, and I got a pretty good education along the way, that it appeared that in most of the literatures, in most of the articles, peer-reviewed articles that I read, middle managers were the target. And that's what happened to me 2 or 3 times in corporate America and in the academic world. middle managers who maybe had been there 10, 15, 20 years in a company or with the school, a school who doesn't have tenure, by the way, and that seems to be most of them these days. Tenure is still there, but it's not going to remain, I don't think. But the middle managers seem to be the main target. Why? Because a lot of us were getting, the closer we got to a six-figure income, 15 years into the company, good performance, good raises, and all of a sudden you're making 100,000 and you have your job description all down in a 3-ring binder at the time. Now it would be online, but then the VPs would walk in, or the accountants, or when they were starting to cut at the end of the year, trying to make things look good for the investors, corporate America or education, they would say, who do we have that's making 6 figures that we can find a way to fire, and then we'll bring in 2 people right out of college and pay them $50,000 each. That was 17 years ago that I did this research, and these first 2 are more relevant today than they were then. It's still happening. You probably could tell me stories. But I said, well, there's my link. Downsizing middle managers is the gap, and that will convince the committee. But I wanted to make it even more precise. I wanted to get in there with, why do these 2 things matter, and what's the impact, what's the outcome? I wanted to ask downsized middle managers if they were thinking about franchising and or desires to start businesses. I think it was actually entrepreneurship and the desires to start businesses, but franchising became a big part of that. And I was absolutely right on the money with filling the gap. That was very exciting to me. I said, and I know where I can get these people. I've got a sample already, population already that I can draw from. And that leads to our middle managers. Why did I know that was happening? Because I was watching my friends get laid off, getting a pick slip. They go into a panic mode right after getting fired. Oh my, what am I going to do? I'm 45, 50 years old. I can't go get another job just like this one at 100,000 because I'm in the automotive industry or the tourism industry, and the industry is in a downslide. Therefore, this is happening all around. So if I was working at Six Flags, SeaWorld isn't going to hire me. They don't need anybody. They're laying the people. You get the picture. Pat, what am I going to do? I also noticed that a lot of the middle managers had been there long enough to have several $1,000s, who knows how much, but in a 401k or something that they now had access to once they got laid off, and they talk with a spouse or significant other and say, I'm not going to get laid off again. It's never going to happen to me again. So I'm going to, we're going into business for ourselves. I've got the managerial experience, by golly. I can do this. And, put yourself in that frame of mind. What am I going to do? I'm panicked. I got bills to pay. I've been living a lifestyle of 100, 150,000 a year, plus my spouse may be working, so we may be at living a good life in America or wherever. In this point, my point is that I realized once I started into this research that most of these folks did not take the time for their due diligence. And you combine that with the fact that the people who were selling the franchises and the business opportunities were going after this market, saying, hey, open up this mailboxes, etc. Buy this McDonald's franchise. We've got this new snow cone thing. You can be your own handyman. You can go on the internet. What I'm saying is true. At least here in the United States, it's very true. I'm pretty sure that it applies all over the world where economies may be similar. I know I lectured 3 or 4 years ago in Bogota, Colombia, and lots of evidence of entrepreneurship down there in terms of franchise and multi-level marketing, like Avon and things. They treated me like a king down there. It's wonderful. Conversely, I lectured about 10, 15 years ago, both times by invitation. I was a visiting scholar, is what they call it. It was pretty cool. But they asked me, a school in Alabama asked me could I go and teach some marketing courses for 2 weeks? And I said, yeah, I can travel if it's the right time. Where do you want me to go? I want you to go to Hanoi. And I said, Vietnam. Hanoi. Yes. And I said, well, I was there 30 years ago under different circumstances. I hope if things have calmed down, yeah, I'd be happy. And I did go, even though I was afraid to go. And it turned out to be a really good experience with the students. But it was totally different than what I found in terms of entrepreneurship than what I found, say, in Bogota, Colombia, or Dublin, Ireland. I did a little work there just a few years ago. And for these folks, if it looks too good to be true, hey, we know the saying, high failure rate in franchises. That was something, if I had to do a similar dissertation all over again, I would do it on this topic right here. Scott Shane, Dr. Shane Scott Shane, he's a doctor and a well-known expert in franchises. I don't know where he's at now. He was at MIT when I tried to talk with him, but he did not return my calls. I would do something on franchises because that's not a guaranteed success, and there is a high failure rate for a number of reasons. And I think personally what I found was that the people who were getting downsized and the people who fall into this category, the people that I was using as a sample, they knew they had good manager skills. And they had to have survived as long as they did and do so well. But they didn't have business ownership skills. And I promise you, I've interviewed so many of these people, and I talk with them daily, my friends that own businesses around Mansfield here. It's different skill sets, totally. That's my opinion, but I could probably back that up. So my observation, I told you about my respect for the literature. When I got into it and started doing what they asked me to do, I said, this is not something that I want to do. This stuff is boring. Don't want any part of it. And then I realized, well, you better want a part of it, or you're not going to get through the program because they hold all the cards. I've got some topics that I'm going to look at the clock and check where I'm at. Topic observations. Yeah, I'm going to have to race along, I think, to keep up with myself here. And what I may do is just end on the slide that I thought I was going to. We'll probably be close to the hour, and then go and regroup, because my slides, I have no idea where I'm at with the handouts here now. I learned to do what they wanted me to do with the peer-reviewed journals, and I got good at it. But I'm not going to tell you that I have a respect for 80% of what's been published. I'm not going to tell you that. And as you look at the literature, you can make your own decisions. Is there some valuable stuff out there? Yeah, there is. But as Dr. Anderson said in his book, large percentage of it, 70, 80, whatever you want to tag it with, is done because people in tenured positions are told to publish or perish. And they're given funds and sabbaticals to do that. Those days are gone with most of the schools. They still give some support. I'm not picking on it, but the publish or perish, I hope it leaves forever, because it's produced a lot of nothing. I was given a presentation at the USA SBE conference, United States Association of Small Business and Entrepreneurship, USA SBE, great site. Go look at it. Try and get published there. I did. I met a guy who presented with me. We were on the same panel. He was from California, and he did the best qualitative dissertation. The best. His sounded like the most fun because he had a sailboat, and he was a sailor, and that's what he liked to do. And so he would bring his sample people on for the cruises and interview them while they're cruising on the sailboat. He's taping everything, and man, what a way to conduct your research. And it was tremendous research. I don't really remember what it was, but he was a funny guy, and I always remember I guess all of his boats and everything would have been total write-offs. Also met a lady when I was working at another college that did, up at the University of North Texas, the therapy of quilt making. Folks, I'm not here to pick on quilt making. It sounds like I am. And we did with her a lot. We picked on it, but she did her doctoral dissertation at the University of North Texas. That's a tough place to do your doctoral dissertation. I taught up there for 3 years. I know. But the therapy of quilt making. Okay, there's a buzzword for you. Do you like therapy? Well, maybe you don't do quilts, but maybe you want to start looking at dissertations. I'm giving you the tips on topics now. Look at therapy and see where it takes you. I learned this one from Dr. Shankar Menon. Shankar Menon. You could probably Google him up. I think he's still up in West Virginia somewhere. He was at the University of Sarasota, and he was giving us topics. And he was a funny guy. And he said, let me tell you what you can get away with in this world of dissertation. He said, there's a lot of experts out there on rice. There's a lot of experts out there on raising rice and producing rice and how rice is important to the world. But very few people, except for one guy that he knew of, did it on the importance of a grain of rice. Does that fill a gap in the literature or not, folks? Wow. I mean, it doesn't mean anything to you and me, but there you go. Does country music cause suicides? I laughed out loud when I read this one. I got it off the internet. It was actually published. Where? I don't know. They don't give you the schools on the sites that I was looking at. Does country music cause suicides? Not for me, but I'm scared to ask. It's like the old joke. What do you get? It's a good Texas joke. What do you get when you play a country music song backwards? You get your guns back, you get your wife back, you get your house, you get the idea. It's a pretty good joke. I couldn't believe this was actually off the internet, the existence of unicorns. You figure it out. Or this one, how do humans digest shrews? I'm thinking, again, who cares? Somebody did, and they got it published. More topics that are intended to be a little bit humorous. If you can't tell that they're supposed to be kind of humorous, then I need to tell you, which is heavier, a pound of lead or a pound of feathers? Do chickens prefer good-looking people? What kind of literature review do you use to support something like that? What kind of chickens do you interview? How do you decide whether someone's good look? Well, I can go on forever. Beijing rap and hip-hop culture. I don't think that's really funny. I think that's valuable. Honestly, you and I are so much involved in cultural sensitivity and cultural tolerance, and it's part of every company's onboarding these days. So, boy, they might really be onto something here and probably had a good time doing it. Theft among ethicists. Again, it seems to be a little bit funny, but I got thinking to myself when I was reviewing the ethics stuff. It reminded me of the saying that we use a lot here that I use with my grandkids. Theft among ethicists. I tell them there's honor among thieves. If you're running with the wrong crowd, they're all going to be lying to protect one another. My girls are all teens now. In fact, I was talking with them this morning. I took a few of them to school, told them what I was going to do, and they said, "Grandpa, we ought to be there with you." And I said, "What for?" And they said, "Well, we can ruin your presentation like that guy that just went viral. You saw it, the news guy, Britain, I think, or maybe somewhere, where he was doing an intensive news thing with Fox or somebody, and the kids came wandering in." That was hilarious, and that has happened to me. Theft among ethicists. One more thought about ethics on a serious note. I don't know what's right and wrong, folks. I gave that up a long time ago. That's why I like to study ethics. I know how Joe Levesque lives, but I've also noticed that other people don't live that way. And I can't say I'm right and I'm wrong. I know that I think I'm doing. I don't know the answer to that question. What's the point I was going to make? The prime example for me is bribery. Bribery here in the United States, you get in a lot of trouble for bribing people. So we don't do that. We have other names. We call them gifts and other trips and stuff like that. But it seems like, from what I've been able to see, the only place that ethics is forbidden is the United States. Other countries that I've looked at and studied, it seems to be a pretty common way of doing business. So everybody else but the United States, I don't know that I can say that, but you get where I'm going. How does navigating change a taxi driver's brain? Again, sounds a little bit humorous, but day in and day out, the same thing. The discipline, the what do they call it? The muscle memory from constant repetitive things. Yeah, that's somebody may have done a good job with that. The last one, I have nothing. It left me speechless. I have no words. Ultrasonic velocity in cheddar cheese. You figure, I don't know. Do I have more topics? I do, and that gets a little bit more serious here as I'm going to go through these slides quickly and try and wind up where I want to before we take a break. We may let the break spill over into consumers' expectations and perceptions on the real estate market in London. You can take that apart. You don't want to do London, you don't want to do real estate, but you may want to do consumer expectations and perceptions in handheld devices, iPhones. Outsourcing may pose a threat to the security and confidentiality of the firm. You may not care about the firm or security, but outsourcing is still a hot topic. If you look at what's going on with the politics in the United States, you can absolutely see it everywhere. A study of the effects of organizational culture. I just love that. Do you have to do employee motivation? No, you don't have to. But can you talk about culture? Yeah, get out there and see what everybody else is doing in terms of cultures studies, and there it is again. What are the potential cultural issues faced by companies? Lots of room for you to use the buzzwords and get out there. Consider a replication study. If you get the school's permission, you'll get mine, but I don't know how the school feels about this. And here's an example of a replication. Instead of an entrepreneurship in rural Malaysia, you would use an investigation of handicraft producers in this area, Sabah region. You do entrepreneurship in London, an investigation of craft makers. You could use much of the same literature review, and that's what I encourage with the replication. You can't do the same thing because that's plagiarism, and we're not encouraging that. But if you find a study that did a study on men in Detroit, you could do the study on women in Detroit and really update a lot of the literature to save yourself some steps. Examination of political behavior by middle managers. There we go. I found a lot of middle managers and professional investor psychology and investment. SPSS, I can skip this slide just to say if you're going to do statistics, when I was going through the SPSS was the only thing they allowed. I'm not current on what is available in the terms of data mining and what is applicable, but I'm sure SPSS is still there, and that's one that you can look at, but I'm sure there's others. My personal experience, I've told you, I took a rather cavalier approach to my coursework in the PhD DBA, and I got busted. I got an F on my first two papers. Had a chip on my shoulder. I figured I knew how the game was played, and I realized they had different rules, and I had to comply. I brought a consumerist attitude, and really that played itself out as a lack of respect to the committee and the faculty. And when I saw what I was doing, I changed and said, okay, if you're going to, the first week down there, I realized I have to make up my mind. If I'm going to stay with this, I'm going to be a good student. MBA versus PhD materials, it was just peer-reviewed journals. That was it, peer-reviewed. Positives and negatives, I've already talked a little bit about that. There's, they say, I had on the one slide, I think it was Benjamin Disraeli who actually is quoted as saying, there are lies, there are dang lies, and then there are statistics, and we all know that. You can move those numbers and make them say anything that you want, and that's half the fun of what we do, and that's half the reason that you have somebody in a committee who's saying, no, that's not quite right. You just read them, and that's all in the second half of what we're doing here. But fun data that draws conclusions is this. We have date, we have input and output. On Monday, you drink gin and tonic. What happens if you drink too much? Drunk. On Tuesday, you switch. You go vodka and tonic. What happens if you drink too much? You're drunk. On Wednesday, you try rum and tonic. Drink too much, you get drunk. Evaluate the results. The common input each day is tonic. Common results and the output each day, a little bit intoxicated. What's the conclusion? Get rid of the tonic. There you have statistics. Different schools. Yeah, being a consultant, before I forget that, I haven't been with a lot of schools because I can't hold down a job. I just want to let you know that the 3 or 4 major schools that I've been with here in the area, and it's been like anywhere from 8 to 12 years with each one, which is a pretty good track record, but nothing like if you have tenure. And tenure, of course, I talked about that a little bit. One of the things, both in tourism and in academics, that I have found about myself is that I tend to lean toward the new schools because I like to help schools get started. It's part of the consultant in me. I know the business, and I think I have something valuable to offer as a consultant, for a period of time for a new school. And then there comes a time when I either work myself out of a job, or a couple of the schools that I've worked with, we've done what they've been bought. More often, what happens, just like in corporate America with middle managers, ladies and gentlemen, a new dean comes in, and even though I've been at the top of the list and doing great work like others, he or she wants to bring in their own crew, and they find a way to get rid of people who they want to give some job. I've never seen nepotism like I've seen in some of the private schools, where people hire their relatives and there's nobody to stop them. They say that academic freedom, of course, it has many meanings, but I thought that I was leaving the political world of politics behind when I entered academics. I thought I would never have a boss again. I couldn't have been more wrong. Would I do it again? Yeah, I'm doing what I love to do, and that's help people along, and I like to think that I'm good at what I do. But some things you can't get away from. That was the consultant in me. I've wound up bouncing from school to school as they needed, and I've managed to stay employed. Sometimes 2 or 3 places at one time. I know people who have worked for 10 or 15 schools. That'd be tough to do. But the other things, I'll get to these questions here in just a second. The 3 things that I left out in the prior slides before I go forward with the slides was that I didn't emphasize enough that when I went to graduate school for the DBA, PhD, the doctoral level, it was a promise that I made to myself years ago. And the reason that I did it was because I had been in the business, as I mentioned. I wanted to stay in the business, and I wanted to get the terminal degree to open up my options as a promise that I had made to myself. But I didn't want to write a dissertation. I know that may come as a shock or sacrilege or something to you, but after I had finished my coursework and I got to know and some of the instructors, they were such a small school at the time that I'd had them for repetitive courses. I got to know them. They got to see the quality of my work after the F's, that I could do the work and that I would do the work and that I would respect what they had set up there. But when I got to the end, I said, folks, I don't want to write a dissertation. They said, well, you have to. And I said, well, I'm asking to appeal that. And here's the reason why. You got me into this program and got me through these courses to show me how to review peer-reviewed articles. That was the big deal, so that I could take those and turn them into a paper reviewing or criticizing or filling a gap or something. In all of these courses that I've taken, a bunch of them, dozens of courses that I paid for and passed, I've demonstrated my ability to write to you already. You know that I can write because you've read them, reviewed them, and you've graded them. I said, I don't want to write a dissertation because the only thing that does is put my voice out there among all the peer-reviewed journals. I don't want to join that group. I want the degree so that I can teach. And I joined this program, I told them, because I wanted to become a researcher, not a writer. That's legitimate. And all of the committee said, that makes a lot of sense. We really are teaching you to be a researcher, but the writing is the end part of it. And I said, well, I've already done enough writing. I said, why don't you just give me 3 or 4 more classes that would fill up call it a dissertation. I almost got my way with that, but it was, it didn't fly. But I've always thought that was a good argument on my part. And I did what they asked me to do. Didn't want to do the dissertation, didn't want to have a voice. And as we move into samples and quantitative versus qualitative, as I tie this stuff together, and as you look at your peer-reviewed journals and you review them as you're preparing to write a paper or a dissertation, I still continued in my coursework. I still continued with my iconoclastic, challenging, critical thinking skills. I had to. I just couldn't buy into everything that everybody else was saying. And sometimes in the classes, the professor would say, Joe, here's a paper I want you to review, you and 4 other classmates. Go home to Texas, come back here next time, be prepared to present your findings and your evaluation of the paper. And that's where I first learned how subjective that can be, is people would present the same paper in their evaluation of it, and mine would be off the wall. And one of the things that I started to look for, and then I found myself saying, this is good critical thinking, Joe, and don't let them discourage you from doing it. Because in a lot of these articles, especially the ones that I mentioned earlier that were done for publish or perish, remember I mentioned that, and it was done by professors at state universities with tenure and given the money in the sabbaticals and blah, 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 blah. I looked at a lot of those that they gave to me to evaluate. I would evaluate and I would look immediately at the sample. Who are they querying? What are they asking? Who are the people? Because I had just a passion for this sample stuff. And in a large percentage of those papers, I would find a professor at a large state university who was tenured, who was publishing or perishing, and they would use as their sample, I found it dozens of times, they would use as their sample the large number of students that they had in their class. Well, that may not bother you, but it bothered me. And that's why I presented it that way in the class. I would look, and I'm going on a rant, so I'm going to reel back in and get back to the slides and the questions. But this is important to me. I placed myself in that position. Tenured professor at a state university, and I've got 200 people in a class, and I've got 4 sections of the class, so I probably got 800 people. And so I come in and I say, look, class, I'm doing this research project on behalf of the university, and I'd like you to fill out this questionnaire. Will you all do that for me? Of course, it's it's up to you. Put yourself in the student's position. You're one of 100 people in that class, 200. Are you going to get up and walk out? You're not going to. You're scared of the professor. He or she has a lot of power over you, especially at a state university, if you know how the game is played there, which I did. So are they going to get up and walk out? No, they're not. They're going to fill out the questionnaire rather than get noticed for walking out on it. And I would ask all of you in this seminar today, is that informed consent or is that coercion? Make up your own mind. You know where I'm headed with it. Is there a preferred, questions here now, is there a preferred method of citations to school? I think I've answered that. Sir, I would like to know the difference between the method, methodology, and the approach. All right, let's move to the next slides. I can do that. Here's some methods, 2 of them. 2 of the most popular, qualitative versus quantitative, and the differences. I just pulled these off of lots of different sites. Qualitative can be focus groups. That's a big one that I really like. I've done a lot, especially in corporate America. In-depth interviews, qualitative, and reviews of documents, asking people what they think. You want to find out if people are under stress, if they're satisfied with their jobs. And I'm not suggesting that, because job satisfaction is probably the most difficult thing to measure. So I would steer, but what are people thinking? Quantitative takes surveys, structured interviews sometimes, and observations or reviews of records. Qualitative is primarily inductive process used to formulate a theory from talking with all of these people about issues surrounding death. Here's what we find. And I've seen a lot of good presentations on people who study the grieving process, even in the business schools. Lots of good dissertations talking about that and how the impact. Quantitative is primarily deductive process used to test constructs and concepts. It's very restrictive, but if you know what you're after from the start and you design things accordingly, it can be very rewarding. More on qualitative versus quantitative. Qualitative is usually text-based, based on the interviews. A lot of people used to do recordings. Quantitative, it's number-based, and that scares a lot of people because you have to have some pretty good knowledge of statistics. Number one, to know which statistic you need, which tool, or what's the word I'm looking for, which method, how to measure it and how to interpret it. Qualitative is more in-depth information on a few cases, and that is of interest to a lot of people. It's of interest to me. I like that. I'm just not sure that I want to write a 150, 200-page paper on interviews that I've had. And I would say that's why qualitative is a little bit deceptive. I think it's more work than quantitative, but that's arguable because quantitative does require that you have some pretty good statistics courses and know what you're doing. Quantitative is less in-depth, but more breadth of information across a number of cases. Qualitative, no statistical tests. That's why I say it can be deceptive versus quantitative. If you learn the tool that you're going to use and you know the stats pretty well, golly, it's just a matter of using the normal means of interpreting what the results are. And in qualitative, I've often felt like no matter how the researcher tries to spin the results of the interviews in qualitative, no matter how hard they try and spin things to be scientifically accurate, there's bias in there, because if you look at some of the sensitive issues that they cover, how could somebody not do their writing saying, you know, half of the people that I talked with broke down in tears when I brought up this particular subject. Hard not to be biased if you're watching the people cry when you do the writing and the research on the results. You have to report it. That's the deal with both of these. You can't make up what happened. You just report what the results said. And then you explain it away, especially in quantitative. You know, I didn't expect that this many people did that, but that's what the data indicate, and that's what I have put down there. And then you do your limitations and conclusions. And for me, the redeeming part of the entire dissertation, the part that was most fun after you got it all done, you're saying, this didn't turn out the way that I thought it did. I didn't have the sample that I wanted. I know how I can explain that. I just explain what happened. Then I apologize for it in the conclusions and the limitations. I was limited by this, that, or the other thing. And then the real redeeming part of the dissertation is the recommendations for future research, where you can tell the world, you know what? If I had to do this over again, if you're going to do anything like this, you should blank, 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 blank. That's when you know you're done. And as they say, the best dissertation is the one that's done. The best dissertation is the one that's completed. Are you going to do a perfect job on yours? I hope you do, but I didn't. Ran out of time, money, patience, but I did a good job. I'm proud of it, but it has a lot of flaws. Qualitative can be valid and reliable depending on the skill of the researcher. Picture yourself doing the interviews. How good are you at that? I'm pretty good, I think. But everybody does. It's like the comedian Dave Barry always said, there's one thing that all human beings, all Americans, have in common. We all think we're good drivers. You couldn't prove that by me this morning when I was on the highway. Quantitative validity and reliability issues. We're going to talk a little bit more about those. And the instrument design. I want to leave plenty of time for that because I got 4 or 5 slides, and it probably is my favorite part. Qualitative is exploratory into opinions and motivations, which takes you into an area that you may or may not be qualified to figure out, especially if you get people talking and they get emotional, or they get intimate, or they get hysterical. Doesn't always happen, but you can see where quantitative gathering data that can be transformed into useful data. And as I mentioned in the slide, I think it's the next one, useful data tells you that if you just don't drink any tonic, then you, if you don't drink any tonic, you can drink as much rum, vodka, or anything else. I love that one. I don't know why. You want to approach the problem scientifically. That'll keep you on the track of use. So identify, state the problem, the root cause, remove the cause, design a data sheet. I don't know why I put that up there. I don't even know how to explain that. What I meant by that was get your plan down and start your process with the end in mind so that you know the steps and you don't have to make them up. I covered lies, dang lies, and then I got into a little bit of the statistics, the output. Let's go into surveys because that's spread along with the methods. So we'll talk about some different kinds of surveys. Some of these slides are pretty fun. And I think we're right on time here as I was looking at, yeah, we're okay. Look at some survey attributes. There's many ways to collect the data, many more ways now than there was 20 years ago when I was doing it. In fact, I'll talk about that right now. I thought that I was going to be able to collect all of my data because I had an agreement with the university that I was working with at the time. I said, can I? And I did all this, got all the stuff signed, stuff. My deal was to come in with the surveys after I got in the instrument design. I said to the provost, can I come in and interview, can I pass these surveys out to the evening students because they're all middle managers. Not all, but that was one of the qualifying questions. And they were, most of the people who were attending the night school at that college were needing to get the degree, sometimes a bachelor's degree, sometimes an MBA, in order to be promoted in the job. I think that's 80% of the people who are enrolling in MBA programs, especially those programs with open enrollment. I can't speak to the state schools or the ones that still have the GMAT, and I can't speak, and I shouldn't, to schools that are trying to keep you out rather than let you in. I'm all for open enrollment, and the trend that we've seen in the past 10, 15 years has proven to me, just intuitively, has proven to me that the market, let me just rephrase that, what I've seen in the trend in the past 30 years in higher education across the board, private and public universities, is that for business people, most of the time, this would be a good research study, by the way, for business people, most of the time, they are, I lost my train of thought, but across the board, private, public universities, for people who are enrolling, are doing so because they're forced to by their company. And that may or may not be a valid thing. I don't know what they are in the company, but if they come there, I say, well, what brought you here? Well, company said I need to get an MBA in order to be promoted. Is that the truth all the time on the part of the company? No, it's a smokescreen, but it is driving people. Oh, my point was the trend has been a market-driven schools. It's driven by the market now, no longer by administrations who are administering standardized tests to keep people out. That has been the case in the past. The GMAT, the LSAT, all of those things. So that's with the private universities, it lets people in, and I think provides the same or better quality than the state colleges. That's a whole nother hour or two or week of discussion. But back to the slide, many ways to collect the data. I didn't have that luxury. I still got my data, but I got permission from the school. Then I showed up to get, and I got shut out. And I would go into the class and say to the instructor, "You told me that I could come in here and get these. This is going to take too long. We have a test next week. We need to review. We don't need you. Why you have to come back another time." I got shut out by the majority of my peers that had agreed to do this. I didn't find out until years later that the reason they shut me out was because they were jealous of what I was doing. I didn't find that out until a long time after. Can measure simple or complex things, can be customized, sampling can be utilized, large quantities of the SurveyMonkey was the only site that came to my mind that's available. You've probably filled out. It's very popular, and I'm going to use it on a few projects and research things that I'm doing in the future, but there's others. And obviously the point of this slide is take advantage of all these online things. You shouldn't have any problem gathering the data, especially if you hire a service who will guarantee X number of respondents. Surveys have lots of limitations. Sometimes people won't admit to certain things. Sometimes they have their own agenda. Surveys can be costly in terms of time, money, and effort. In my case, I've mentioned this before, I was running out of time and money, and then I ran into the fact that I was running out of people that I could administer. So I had a small sample. Still got the job done. The committee approved it, and I had to explain, and I did in my dissertation that I didn't get near the number of people that I wanted, but it was enough to draw some conclusions about middle managers downsizing and their desires to start entrepreneurial businesses. Even when correctly done, results may be inconclusive. Must report accurate data. Why do surveys fail? Let's see why do surveys fail? Most of the stats people, well, there's lots of reasons. I put these down because most stats people are in general agreement with this, and this is part of a presentation that I made a dozen times with a guy that I used to work with, brilliant stats guy, and he was working. We worked together for about 5 years, made presentations all around the United States for this school. And then he went to, I want to say, the university for some big state school, because he called me up and asked me, should I make this move? And I said, well, based on blah, blah, and he decided to move. I haven't talked with him in a long time. But his deal was always this sampling error with people. People are unpredictable, we know that. And the measurement error, the content. Sometimes one of these exists, but if they both exist, sampling plus measurement error, that equals total error. It's garbage in, garbage out then. A lot of people attempt to minimize the sampling or measurement errors, which we all do, but that's a lot of work. Again, all the more reason to have a very good understanding of what tool you're planning to use to answer the research question and know the failures and the limitations of those tools before you get into it. If either error source is ignored, well, that's kind of redundant. Total error will be substantial. Here's some examples in the next 10-15 minutes. I'm going to go through and talk a little bit. I don't see any other questions. Let me scroll down and see if I'm missing anything. I am. Difference between business and academic writing, especially when the topic is business oriented. If that's a question, my answer would be that business writing for me has always been to sell something. Business writing for me, for the most part, was either writing a marketing plan or a sales plan or a sales pitch, for lack of a sales presentation. But when I was in management, I found that business writing for me came largely in the form of memos to supervisors, specifically the accountants, with justifications on why I needed a larger budget. Those of you that are in the business world know that you have a budget, and if you're in charge of that budget, you use it all up, and sometimes even try and go a little bit over, because if you leave anything on the table thinking, well, I've been a very good steward of this budget, and look, there's still 50,000 left in there, haven't I done a great job? My experience has been, no, you really haven't, because you're going to find the budget they give you next year is 50,000 less. So I've always said you want to use it up, plus you want to ask for more. And if you were in sales or marketing, like I've always been in, you want to ask. We're very optimistic people about next year's sales. What do we expect? So the business writing for me was to convince management to give me a larger budget and more people going upward. And then to subordinates, it was the memo saying, hey, we've got a lot to do. We've got to sell a lot more of these things next year, and therefore you're going to get larger bonuses, and here's the incentives. So business writing for me has always been trying to convince somebody of something. Attorneys do the same thing, but they do it in language that none of us can understand. And I think that's a true statement. And academic writing is whatever the academics that you're working with tell you it needs to be. It's been different at every school. The formats have been different that I've been with. It's been very, but whoever is put it in the policy is that's it. But it's pretty similar. It's academic writing, and it's difficult to do for most of us. Dr. Joe, you are my supervisor. Amir, yes, good to see you. Is there an advantage to using mathematical models in the dissertation, even in a social science type environment? Yeah, there are. If you use mathematical models and statistics, even in social sciences, I think you demonstrate to whoever your committee is, or your mentor or your tutor, that you are proficient with that. And whether that takes us back to old school thinking or not is debatable. But it's not like me as a tutor. I'm not going to question numbers, especially if you're comfortable with what you're doing. I will question qualitative stuff because I'm not really proficient with it, and I know I have to make sure that the person that's doing it knows what he or she is getting into. I hope that answers the question. Joe, how do you reference to some materials that don't have a page number available? Oh, I think there's guidelines on the website, but we can get that answer for you. I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I assume we can use both. It depends on what you're trying to check. Qualitative. I think you can use mixed methods if that's what your question is asking. It's a judgment call on part of the school, something that I would always ask them. I use surveys in my research as the most common qualitative tool. Very good. I agree surveys can be costly. Yeah, I haven't I haven't priced any on SurveyMonkey, but I'm getting ready to. I've got a couple projects that I want to get behind me. I've been fooling with them too long. Our qualitative research always, I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. Measurement error, failure to assess surveys reliability. Is the data source trustworthy and dependable? Probably never, but you go with the best that you can. Can we expect to get the same or similar results each time the survey is used in the given situation? You can test it for reliability and validity. And I'd like to stress that in this slide and a few of the others, reliability and validity, to the extent that you can work them into your instrument design and your surveys and into your dissertation. You could want to be able to tell the readers and the committee, this survey is reliable because of this, this, and this. And there's tests for reliability that I don't need to go into here. And it is valid because we did a pre-test on all of these, and we did post-tests, and they all came back. So you can only get it as clean as you can get it, but that's what people who are reading these things are looking for. Did you just throw it together? And I can get ahead of myself here, but yeah, I did just throw mine together. That was the part, one of the best courses that I had that taught us how to do the instrument design. Was just one of the best courses. I enjoyed it. It was Dr. Menon, again, so entertaining. I took so many notes. I did so much research. I said, this is just absolutely designing this. This is right up my alley. So I'm going to design my own instrument, and I did. And it was the biggest mistake I made in the entire process, because I ran it by the committee, and then they started hitting me with this pre-test stuff. How were these pre-tested? Well, I ran it by. No. There's ways to do this. It just took me forever to get the instrument correct, and I would today, and I will when I do my next research project, have somebody else. I'll give them the 4 questions that I want, and have them come up with the questions that have already been tested, or they will do the testing. That was really difficult. Error: does the scale or survey measure what it intends to? We hope, but I've never seen a perfect one. Do the respondents interpret the questions the same way as the researcher? I've got a couple slides coming up that are fun, that will answer the question: do the respondents interpret the questions the same way as the researcher? One cartoon that I tried to copy, but I couldn't get it, shows a lady coming up to a front door and a guy with a cowboy hat standing on the front porch. And the caption said, it's the cowboy speaking. He said, "So, ma'am, you're asking me if I own any stock?" "Yeah, there's 4,000 of them right out there in the field." Stock means different things to different people, obviously. Customer satisfaction is not the same as product quality. And this is tough to separate. When somebody's satisfied, they got a quality product and they know it. But is it really a quality product, or are they just happy with the piece of junk that somebody sold them? I love this stuff. Perception is reality. It is in the world of marketing. It is in the world of marketing. An individual's perception's opinion can vary over time. I've been around long enough to agree with that one. Design tips: keep it simple. Obviously, you know that it should appear not to take too long. When you set it in front of them, they ought to look at it and say, "Oh, this is going to be easy." They shouldn't start looking at the pages saying, "This is going to take too long." That's what happened to me. So it should appear. Maybe it's deceptive. You want to draw them into the tough questions if you're going to ask tough questions. Should be eye appealing with lots of white space. You don't want to intimidate people. You're asking them for a favor with informed consent. You're saying, "Help me." The people will help as long as they don't feel threatened or ambushed. Start with easy questions. Move into sensitive questions slowly, if you move into sensitive questions at all. Are they needed to get your end result? Most of the time, I don't think they are. People do it for drama. Include clear instructions, and that comes in the pre-test and the post-test. Be sure it flows smoothly. Sensitive information. Do you really need to know their income? Do you? Do you know? You have to know what kind of property. You have to know their investments. How do you know if they're mentally or technically able to really do what you're asking them to do? Sensitive questions. Revelation of shortcomings, personal deficits. Are you going to hit them where it hurts? You're going to ask them questions that are going to be, draw blood? Do you really need to know their socioeconomic status? Do you really need to know their sexual orientation? Yeah, you might. There's lots of dissertations that are built around this topic in discrimination or behaviors or history. Yeah, you might, depending on what you're going after. But obviously, we'd all agree that these are sensitive. Alcohol, do you like gin or vodka or tonic? As my prior slide, I didn't realize that would tie in so well, but do you really? You may be asking about addictions, and it may be sensitive, and obviously the questionnaire would need to be sensitive, for lack of a better word. You got to know their age. I think I asked this in mine, but I probably wouldn't anymore. And if you start asking questions about mortality or morbid, I ran into a lot of this. I was 3 years in the life insurance business with Northwestern Mutual Life. It was a business that I absolutely loved. I wish I had never left that business, but I did leave it, number one, because it was very hard to make a living. Ironically, it was hard to make a living because the people that I was selling the policies to were 90% middle managers who were employed, ironically. And then a year after I would sell them a policy that they needed and they wanted, they would get laid off and the policy would lapse and I had to pay back the commissions. If you've ever been in that position, the rollbacks, as they call them, are, well, it drove me out of the business. That was part of what drove me out of the business. The other thing that took me out of the business was I got a call again from the University of North Texas up in Denton, a couple hours north of where I live, and the head of the insurance department said, "Are you Joe Levesque?" "Yes." He said, "I have your resume here. Somebody gave it to me." I said, "Yes." He said, you are in the insurance business?" I said, "Yes, with Northwestern Mutual." He said, "You have your Group 1 and Group 2. You have your insurance and securities licenses?" I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "And you have an MBA from the University of Dallas?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Will you come up here and interview?" And I said, "I will, but I know that there's a lot more people, much more qualified than me, that have their CLUs and other certificates, financial things." And he said, "But we can't hire anybody unless they have insurance license and an MBA." He said, "Most of the insurance people don't have the MBA." So I went up and interviewed, and I got one of my first teaching jobs. I was up there for 2 or 3 years. They still call me from time to time. So that took me out of the insurance business too. The more time, some summary points here. The more time you spend in survey development, as I mentioned earlier, the less time you will spend with data analysis and interpretation. Doing the work up front, beginning with the end in mind. I've given you plenty of that. Open-ended questions take more time. Exit surveys don't explain why people stay. If you only study the 10% bad apples, your results will infer that all apples are bad. Now to the fun slides. Focus. Every question should focus directly on a single specific issue. Something that can help trigger memory or suggestions. Example, the wrong way. How would you improve the hotel? Right? How would you improve the check-in process in the hotel? You can see where these are going, and they're kind of fun. It's how to write effective research questions. Use core vocabulary that people can understand. Use words that are likely that people know. The wrong way. I love this one. Are you cognizant of all the concepts to be elucidated? The right way would be, do you know all about all the ideas that will be explained? Bang. We're on the same page and you understand. Use clarity. Demands that virtually everyone interprets the question exactly the same way, like the example I gave a few minutes ago with the rancher and the stock versus the stock market. And this is tough to do. Wrong. Where are you from? A right way would be, in what city were you born? Yeah. Zero in. When do you usually go to work? Is wrong way. Right way, what time do you ordinarily go to work? And that still can be refined, I'm sure. Beware of problem words like all. This is great. Are we doing all we can for our students? Always. Do you always read your classmates' postings? That's also very intimidating. Ever. Have you ever listened to a Chipmunk song? So we're getting close. I'll come back to the summary thoughts. I have a few more questions to see if I can do this. Roger, ideographical. Golly, I'm still not sure I know what that means. I'm sorry. Roger, is it appropriate to use one or more of your LIG seminar papers and expand the research for your dissertation? Hey, Roger, that is a loaded question and a good one, and I'm going to give you answers that you'll want to you want to make sure that the school accepts my answers, because it goes into an area that I don't have any problem with, but I've noticed it varies from school to school. It usually is referred to as recycled papers. Uh, I listened to a lecture once from a guy, professor, who was talking. He was talking in favor. Now, please hear me very carefully. That if I see plagiarism in anyone's paper, blatant copy and paste, I'm obligated to tell them that that's unacceptable. A lot of professors will flunk them right away. I've always said, strike the three strikes. If I see plagiarism once, I'll call it to your attention, and we'll just forget the whole thing. If I see it twice, then I'll give you a bad grade. Third time, then I just fail somebody. That's usually pretty good. But plagiarism is extremely subjective, and that's what this professor was saying. Because plagiarism, and again, take what I'm saying very loosely and very cavalierly. Look, I got cavalier on the slide there. That's where I got the word from. I think plagiarism is taking somebody else's thoughts and making them your own and not giving them credit, from what I have been able to see. But if Joe Levesque writes a paper for Roger McCoy's class, and Joe Levesque did the work and Roger gives him a good grade, Joe's grateful for that. And he takes Roger for another class, and it's a similar class with similar topics. Can Joe Levesque take the same paper and turn it in? I would say most of the time the answer would be no, but I have done it. And I've done it with the full knowledge that it belongs to me and that it was my work. And if Roger's first class, if it was okay in the first class and the second class was another management class, it could have very easily been somebody else, Bob Martin's class that I'm in now, who doesn't even know Roger McCoy, and he's asking for virtually the same research on the same topic. And Joe Levesque said, I've already done that for another guy. You guys need to get your courses aligned where it challenges me to do different work. Why would I go? You understand? I know you understand the logic that I'm trying to use. It's not logic that holds up when you get caught, which I did. And when I was at the University of Sarasota, and I got called into the dean's office, and the dean told me about that, and I used this logic, and he said, well, we don't know about Ralph. It was about what it came down to. And I said, well, it doesn't say anywhere that I can't. Guess what ended up in the catalog right after that? And all the other students started blaming me for being called out, and then they started gathering papers. So, loaded question, and I know that was a very loosey-goosey answer. Obviously, the solid answer is, if you're going to use the same topic, do some more updated research and change it up. And capitalize on your own research when you can. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I would say that everything that you do in the course room in all of your classes should help you build toward things that you're going to use in your dissertation. I think I can say that without getting in trouble. Anything else? Appropriate to use one of your bad research? Yeah, I think that's what you said, really. So yeah, I would think so. On which part must insist our writing between the literature review, the methodology, and the research and the results of our research? Not sure I can answer that one. And I'm running out of time. I'm very sorry. My personal experience, I told you all about choice of topics, stats, courses, design, proposal stage during the coursework. Was my cavalier attitude through the coursework right or wrong? That's the business that we're in. I think academic freedom, the critical thinking, pick these things apart, find flaws in somebody else's work. If that's cavalier, then what is critical thinking? I think cavalier is where, for me, I found that I stepped over the edge was showing disrespect. Not intentionally, but because of my cavalier attitude, the instructors in the PhD level found my attitude quite different from the others, and I backed up and said, I realized if I want to do this then I need to become a little more compliant. And that leads me to some other summary comments. Again, with having a cavalier attitude. Those of you who have taken courses in PM project management, some of you are project managers, so you'll be very familiar with what I'm going to say next. And I'd like to kind of leave it as I'm moving into closing. The few courses that I took, and I've taught a few of them on project management, I remember, and in other courses, and this may not be current, there may be something that replaces this now, but back when I was taking those courses, they had us look at things. Was it Deming? Was he the fishbone guy? I think so. But when they would use the charts and the flow charts on how to project, how to do this, how to get there from here, one of the ones that always fascinated me was called the PERT chart, the P-E-R-T. You probably all know about that. I'm pretty sure it stands for Performance Evaluation and Review Technique, or something close to that. Performance with a PERT chart. And as I recall, it was, unless I'm getting these mixed up, I think that one was used by NASA to get from point A to point B. Progress Evaluation Review Chart, or technique, whatever, probably the same thing. And I was fascinated by that because I really, to that point in my career, I didn't have any feel for what most of you use every day, and they call them now the mind mapping, where you crystallize your thoughts, or the flow charts, the mind maps, how to do this, what to do, categorize. You do that with your writing, I know. But with the PERT, I remember as I went through that, I said, well, this is really cool because it's showing us a very sophisticated way to start at point A and get somewhere. And it shows the different paths. Remember that? They called them the critical paths. The thing that really hit me was the thing that they called, well, I think it was called the critical path. The best way, the optimal way to get from here to here and still do it right. And I had an instructor once that said, you know, what they call that, they call it the critical path, but it really is the path of least resistance in many ways. It's how to take the shortcuts and still get it done, get her done. The path of least resistance, a critical path. And so I pretty much have lived my business career and some of my academic career in that manner. They told me it was going to take 5 hours to do this thing, but I just did it as well as anybody else, and I did it in 45 minutes. I either deserve a bonus or I get to go home early. Well, it only worked. The only place I ever found that to work was at Xerox when I was there 2 or 3 years as a salesperson. They'd give you the quota. Here's what you got to do this month. If you want to go over it, it doesn't matter. This is all we're going to pay you, but that's a lot of money. And if you get your quota done in the first week, we don't care what you do for the next 4 weeks. It's the only place I've ever worked that thought that way. David Kearns was the chief executive at the time, and he was totally embraced the whole thinking. And I loved it because I said, man, this means free time for Joe Levesque, free time with family, more fishing, whatever it is that I want to do. I brought that path of least resistance mentality into academics when I first got into it, and I've been blistered for it ever since. It doesn't fit for some reason. I don't know why, but it just doesn't. So I've learned to keep my mouth shut when I'm doing a project. Critical path method. Roger, wow, I think I'm done just about. I got 5 minutes. Reviewed discussion board. I told you by experience on all these things. And what did I do right? I did something timely and it was able to get published. And that was good. And I've had it published a couple different times as I've rewritten it. Haven't redone the research. I just rewrote it to fit the publication that I was trying to get published in. Another good tip for you folks. Find publications that are doing things in the field that you want to do your research in. And when you decide to send it in for publishing, it should take a different format than the way that it had when you submitted it, say, to me or to another tutor. Because in order to get it published, if the journal is any good, then you can look and see that all of the articles follow a format, X number of pages, X number of citations, X number of room, and here's how they want it formatted. And I've had a number of people send things back to me saying, no, we don't want it the way you wrote it, write it the way we want it. Shankar Menon, the doctor down in the University of Sarasota, told me a number of times, told us in the classes, he said, it just made me so mad because if I wanted to get published, I wrote the paper and every piece of it is critical and they want to cut it down. But he said I had to play their game and cut it down in order to get published. And it was a trade-off that really did not sit well with him. What did I do wrong? We don't have time. Certainly, the cavalier attitude could be, I had to change that, so that was wrong. What else did I do wrong? Certainly, the trying to design my own instrument and questionnaire was wrong. Certainly, going to the sample, going after the sample at the college the way that I did, I was so naive. I should have known better than that. What would I do in the future? Golly, no question. I'd use a lot more of the online resources, and I would definitely not write any more papers unless I knew ahead of time where I would wanted to publish them. And that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. I've got a couple ideas that I'd like to get published. I'd like to get something published where they start bringing me around, put me on the Today Show, bring me around on the speaking tour, and pay you lots of money because you had some groundbreaking things that you wrote in the publication. Is that a pipe dream? Who knows? In this day and age of, it probably is a pipe dream, yeah. I think I've got some good ideas, but I'm getting kind of lazy. I hope that the questions I was able to answer, I did answer okay. If I didn't get to your question or answer it satisfactorily, and best wishes to you and à tous.